Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. We're here with another tutorial video. So what are we going over today? We're going over what is a balanced team. So as you can see on the screen here, I have a battle team set up, and this team is set up to be a balanced team. So let's start by talking about what a balanced team actually is. So a balanced team is a team of Pokemon that can actually do everything. I'm not going to be able to every Pokemon in the game, but it's at least going to be able to cover all your bases. Now this is going to have some defensive Pokemon as well as some offensive Pokemon. They're going to be more offensive to defensive, but that does not mean it's not balanced. So what means it's balanced is your two defensive Pokemon here, Scizor and Chansey, they are able to cover your physical and special defenses, while your Dragapult and Cloyster can cover your physical offense, and your Primarina and your Chandelure can cover your special offense. Now, that's not all it takes to be a balanced team. It doesn't mean having two physical, two special, and two defense. You also want to be able to cover your early and late game. So that's where the Dragapult and Primarina come in. So you'll see that I haven't put them like I have with Chansey and Scizor together with their offensive partners. Now that's because these two are for your middle game. And then the late game is your Cloyster and Chandelure. They come in and close it out once your two middle games have picked off most of your opponent's team. The Chansey and Scizor provide you switch-in, so say if you're threatened out by an Ice type of Dragapult, you can switch into your Scizor. Now that's the other thing about a balanced team, is you want to have some sort of synergy between your Pokemon, being Fairy, Dragon, and Steel, but there are other free type synergies that allow you to cover each other's weaknesses. So that means that Scizor can switch in on both Primarina and Dragapult's weaknesses, being Ice and Poison, while your Primarina can switch in on other Dragon types, and also on some of Scizor's weaknesses. So it's basically, you're just covering each of your bases. So you can switch in on Fire types with Primarina as well. So what else can you do? Well, basically you can also then look into even deeper into it. So your two late game Pokemon, being Cloyster and Chandelure in this example, one of them is a Choice Specs user while the other one is a Shell Smash user. So they're not going to want to keep swapping out each time something comes in to threaten them. So you're going to look at picking off the Pokemon that can threaten them out with your Dragapult and your Primarina. These two pair nicely together, being Dragon and Fairy, so you've got two offensive types that can actually switch into each other to pick off the early games. So that's where the Expert Belt and Leftovers come in. These give them the ability to power through, and with Dragapult's case, some longevity to actually set up Dragon Dance, and with Primarina's case, being able to hit more types more effectively. You've then got access to the two defensive Pokemon, and these can take out Pokemon themselves, which makes them even better than your average defensive that just comes in, sets up some hazards, and then runs away. So you got to look at, like, how can I make my team work in the early right through to the late? And you kind of want to think about that from the very first turn. So that's the other reason why you have Dragapult here. This is your entry pivot. So it comes in, it scouts out what your opponent's using, and then runs away. Being one of the fastest Pokemon in the game, it makes Dragapult one of the best Pokemon to do this, and one of the best Pokemon to fit this role. But that's not all that Dragapult can do. So let's have a look at some other examples of Dragapult. You can see up here I've got 6 different examples here. So you've got examples of when a Dragapult is offensive, defensive, and pivoting, as well as being the late game sweeper. So why don't we just always go for the best one? That's because there is no best one. It's the same with Scizor. You can see 2 examples here that are extremely different. One's a Swords Dance setup Pokemon, while the other one is a defensive Sand Tomb Trapper. So what is this showing you? This is basically showing you how a Pokemon can suit many different and why these Pokemon that can suit many different roles are some of the better ones for balanced teams. So you can have Chandelure, which only has a single role. That means that it only can do one thing on a balanced team. Now, if you look at Pokemon that can actually do many different things, these are the best Pokemon for you to start with for your balanced team. So you could have, instead of having the pivot entry Dragapult, you could have the late game Special Sweeper. Or you could have an example of a defensive set that acts as a special sweeper, being the Willow set. Now this set basically it has different roles on your team, so it doesn't fit in place of Sizzle or Chansey, it doesn't fit in place of Dragapult, and it doesn't fit in place of Chandelure. This is a wild card set, so this suits all three different roles on the balanced team. Now it doesn't fit on the physical role because it's not a physical attacker. It's got U-turn there for the pivot. That's why it can fit in the role that Dragapult already runs. But at the same time, it cripples the physical Pokemon, which means it can be in place of Sizzle. But it also late game sweeps through Pokemon after Chansey's gone in and toxic them more. So it can also then fit in place of Chandelure. So think about your Pokemon when you're building them. What role can I do? Now that's why Dragapult's so unique, because it can actually do all these different things. It's not the only Pokemon, but it is one of the only Pokemon that can actually fit in every role on a balanced team. So what else can do that? Let's have a look at Arctic, or like Ninetales, basically. Let's have a look at them. They basically can do two different things on your team. Now they can be your specially defensive Pokemon in place of Chansey, where it also sets up an Aurora Veil. They can also be your sweeping Pokemon in place of your Primarina. That's because they can do things like Moonblast, Blizzard. They can hit very hard, very fast. They can power through most Pokemon that don't resist it. And then you've got the defensive set, again in place of Chansey, which focuses on Disable Encore, forcing your opponent to struggle. So this is a Pokemon that, unlike Dragapult, can't go through all three different stages, but unlike, let's say, Chandelure, which only has one use, I know I keep going back to that Pokemon, but it really does. It can actually serve two different roles. Now the question is, why is it only Chandelure I'm picking on this team? Well, that's because so far we've seen Sizzle and Dragapult, and we've also seen Ninetales. Cloyster is another one of those unique Pokemon that can fit two different roles. Now, Cloyster can fit both the late game sweeper or the early game pivot. Your pivot does not always have to be your attacker. It doesn't have to be the U-turn user. It can sometimes be your defensive one. Now that's where Cloyster comes in. It sets up the toxic spikes, it sets up a life dew to heal it, to keep itself going, and then it teleports out of there. Now this is your entry pivot. It's not your everyday, run-of-the-mill swapping on everything. It acts as your defensive in place of Sizzle, that leads the party, sets up the toxic spikes, which allows you to set up your late and your mid game, and then it swaps out into your mid game. So this is an example of what a defensive pivot looks like. You've seen the offensive in Dragapult, now you've seen the defensive in Cloyster. Now what does a mixed defensive offensive pivot look like? You might be thinking to yourself, what is a defensive and offensive pivot? You might be thinking to yourself, what is a defensive and offensive Pokemon? Well, that's right here. That is Incineroar. Now, there are other Pokemon that can do a similar job that Sizzle does. Pangoro springs to mind. But basically what this Pokemon is looking to do is it's looking to weaken the physical Pokemon. So it's, again, in place of your Sizzle. It's looking to pivot out, which means, again, it's in place of Dragapult, which means you can have a different physical. And it can also, if you play it differently, be your late game sweeper. That's where the other Incineroar comes in. So this is an example of a Pokemon that serves multiple different roles, not all at the same time, not all separately. Basically, it's a bridge between your defensive like Scizor and your offensive like Dragapult. So this is the kind of Pokemon that you can have in two different places depending on how the rest of your team is built. So it serves all three roles but cannot serve all three individually, if that makes sense. So yeah, you can break things and weaken them, or you can come in late game, but basically you've got to think about how the rest of your team is going to be if you're going to run a pivot like this. So this, although it's your starting Pokemon, it doesn't join your team until the very end. So how can we build different Pokemon differently? Now, it's not just a question of your stats. It's not like in the EV training video I did a few weeks ago. This is based on how you set out your moves. So you've got to think about, am I running a lot of pivot moves? Am I running a lot of breaking moves like Brutal Swing and Flare Blitz? These moves are moves that are very powerful but can be survived. But they're going to be survived on lower health. So that means that they're going to swap out and then they're going to bring something else in that can deal with it better. That means that that's what the role of a middle Pokemon is. So the Dragapult and Primarina. So you're looking at these two roles by here at the moment. So you're looking at trying to weaken the Pokemon on the opposing team, as opposed to killing them outright. That's the jobs of Cloyster Chandelure. Some other examples being Choice Scarf Crocodile. It comes in late game. It doesn't quite have enough strength to kill everything straight away in the mid game, but it has enough strength that it can break through what's left in late game, constantly getting stronger thanks to Moxie. It's also the role of your Barrascuda. Now this doesn't have enough defense, so if anything survives its attacks, it's in a very difficult position. It's the stats why Cloyster is a late game. You might be thinking, Shell Smash, that can sweep through everything before anything's weakened. It can, but it's a risky move. Basically, if something bad comes in, they can survive an attack and then destroy it on the special side. So that's where Pokemon like Barrascuda with the lower defenses come into the late game. You've then got Pokemon with the quad weaknesses. These Pokemon are best suited for when their quad weaknesses are already taken out. Usually, let's have a look at, we've got a quad weakness to rock here, and a quad weakness to water. So they'll be taken out by the Ice Beams and the Sparkling Arias. These are all things that need to be considered. If you're going to put these Pokemon on your team, you need to work out, well, what's going to deal with their quad weaknesses. So that's where the mid-class comes in, and these guys get pushed to the late game. You don't want to bring them in only to get threatened out, basically. So what can we do for this? Well, basically try to cover as many types in these two slots as you can. So if you look between these two Pokemon, I have 7 different types covered. Now you might be thinking it's risky not having any healing, not having any setup. That's a risk you've got to take. Now, what can we do to mitigate this risk? Well, you can have passive healing, leftovers. You can have damage boosters, such as expert belts. These take the places of your setup moves. These take the places of your healing moves. In a double battle, you can cover these slots those two slots easily with things like Chansey. I'll show you a doubles Chansey in a sec. And I'll cover the defensive in a moment as well. So we've covered the late game, we've covered the early game. Now, what's some more examples of some defensive Pokemon? So you got your Ferroseed. Now, this is a very early game defensive Pokemon. It's a mixed defense, which means it can serve 2 different slots at the same time in your defensive area. And its entire idea is, I'm going to weaken the Pokemon, turn off all of their like focus sashes, sturdies. I'm also then going to paralyze the Pokemon. Through paralyzing them, I can then Leech Seed, and with this power Leech Seed, you can then go into your defensive Pokemon, and this serves as your healer. So it, as strange as it sounds, it's your healing Pokemon by either forcing them to switch or forcing them to heal your mid-game Pokemon. So these are examples of how you can mitigate that downside in your defensive slots. That's what they're there for. The defensive slots in this team is not there to like cripple and destroy the opponents. They are there to help your mid game work into your late game. On this team, the mid games are highly offensive Pokemon. So this team, they're there to allow for bridge switches. Bridge switch being a switch that you can go into that takes the hits and then allows you to set up to go into your other Pokemon. You've got so the reason how they're able to do that is because of, if you look at their defenses, they are so high that some Pokemon are going to struggle to break them. This means that you can swap in on those Pokemon, force them to swap out into a better answer, and then you can predict what they're switching into and decide if you want to go on the special or the physical. So you've got more Pokemon here that serve the defensive role but still have offense. Now these are unique Pokemon that are able to weaken the opponent. So they're able to, if you're struggling to use your offensive middles, these are the Pokemon you have instead, that you, not instead like not having your offensive middles, these are the Pokemon you can have as an option instead of those to go into that will serve their role for you. So you've got the Hitmontop. Now this is a bright power to intimidate, so it's going to look to weaken the opposing offensive Pokemon. So that's going to serve the role of Scizor. But then it has Brick Break and Bulldoze, two moves that are powerful enough to weaken the Pokemon and force them out by lowering their speed. Then you've got the defensive Pokemon like Malamar. Malamar will serve its role in either of these two slots. Now that's because of its defense being boosted by superpower, so it can serve as your defensive role. But it's one of those weird ones that you can't just have. It has to be there for sort of a reason. It's not going to be a Pokemon that you can just freely switch into like Scizor. It's going to be one of those Pokemon you have to find the right time to switch into it. So it's unique as a defensive breaker. So we can kind of call these Pokemon wall breakers. They swap on the walls and then set up and do incrementally more damage each and every turn. And then they have moves like Rest that allow them to heal up and get rid of the Iron Barbs damage or the toxic damage. And that's what makes them a wall breaker. So we call those wall breakers. They are defensive in their own rights, but can also break through a defensive Pokemon on the other side. So what have we learned? So we've learned basically how a Pokemon can be more than one thing and how to set up the team. Now what is left to learn? Well, what's left to learn is basically how you do it in doubles. So Chansey being healer, as I explained earlier. So you've got different roles in doubles for a balanced team than you do in singles. So what is a doubles balanced team? Well, doubles balanced team looks a lot different. I have an example right here. So you've got your healers. These help your wall breakers. They help them break down the opponent. So you typically will have 2 to 3 healers. One of them being a redirector, such as your Rage Powder, like on Moongus. Then you got your highly defensive healer, being your Chansey. And then you've got your basic all-round. So you've got the defense to survive, so you can set up life juice. you've got the Perish Song to trap your opponents in if they get down to like the last two. So this is a late game healer. Now, if you remember from the singles battle team, we didn't have what we call a late game healer or late game defense. Now that's because in a singles one, you're looking to pick off in the late game. What Lapras is looking to do is it's looking to be there as a late game to keep your late game sweeper alive. That's because there are a lot of like setup sweepers for the late game, being Volcarona. So you see that this team has more defense than it did offense. That is because that's how different a doubles team is to a singles. So we've got the Volcarona here, which sets up the safeguard, sets up your Quiver Dance, and then goes it all in with the Fire Dance and Giga Drain. You then got Lapras here, which helps keep it alive with Life Dew. And also, if your Volcarona goes down, Lapras then Perish Songs, and it's there to be so defensive they can survive the 3 turns needed for Perish Song to kill off everything that's on the opposing team. You do get some support like Whimsicott when it gets brought back, because it's currently been banned and for this season. And then you've got things like Oranguru. Now Oranguru is another late game, but it's also mid and late game. Now this is sort of Pokemon that comes in mid game to instruct and help basically weaken off a Pokemon really quickly. Or it can come in the late game and instruct on say a Giga Drain or Fiery Dance from Volcarona, allowing it to set up quicker. So these Pokemon that can serve multiple roles, they're very valuable, because you never know when you're going to need to be forced onto the late game. In a doubles battle, your Pokemon can go down so quickly sometimes that you need to go onto that late game really fast. Now, one thing I haven't touched on today is the entry hazards. Now, that's because on a balanced team, typically, because you're breaking down the opponent's team in the mid game, you don't really use entry hazards. They're more for when you have a really late finisher. The only ones which I have covered has been Stealth Rocks, which is very good for breaking the opponent's sashes, and one which I haven't touched on yet because I was going to touch on it at the very end is Sticky Webs. Sticky Webs is important sometimes in doubles, but mostly in singles. Now what this does is it lowers your opponent's speed. Now that's important because sometimes you do have your Primarina as a mid game or your Chandelure as a late game. So in the mid and late game, you kind of want to be able to lower your opponent's speed so that they can not break you and revenge kill. If they start to revenge kill, you get put in a very tricky situation. So sometimes you'd want to run a Sticky Web. Now, where does Sticky Web lie on your team? That's why I saved it till last, because that is entirely up to you. I'm quite fond of my defensive web users, but some people prefer their offensive web users. So Vikavolt, which I just showed you, is an example of an offensive. While something which I quickly glance onto the camera as a spoiler is these Orbitals. Now this is one of my favorite ones because it can serve every role of a Sticky Web user, mid and defensive. So you can see even on an offensive set, its defenses are so high that it can serve a mixed role easy. Being Carmine Psychic, that's an offensive. So it can slot in either that slot, Primarina, or that slot, Sizzle, or that slot, Chansey. So that is entirely up to you. So guys, I think that's where we're going to leave it today. It's a short one, I know, but there wasn't an awful lot to talk about when it comes to mixed team. If you have any further questions, please put them in the comments down below. And if you are new to the channel, welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm so glad you chose to pick me for your tutorials on competitive battling. And I hope you do enjoy this video, or say do, hope you did enjoy this video. And if you did, please hit that like and subscribe button down below, and hit that bell icon to be notified whenever I upload new videos. I have been Alice Fairphone, and this has been your competitive battling tutorial. Bye!